If you're anything like me, you managed to make it through decades without ever hearing or having to know what the term bombogenesis meant. But then came 2018, which ushered in a storm known as bomb cyclone, which broke flooding records across Massachusetts. It was a once-in-a-generation flood, they said, but fast forward to this past Friday and Saturday, and bomb cyclone number 2. While it didn't quite break the record, it still managed to make the top 3 worst list in the city's history. So I guess once in a generation isn't so much anymore, and it's time we all get used to our streets regularly turning into canals that could give Venice a run for its money. As Globe development reporter Tim Logan pointed out on Twitter, here's what he wrote: "This is the future world headquarters of General Electric, or at least it was on Friday. Who needs an ocean view when you can have an under-the-sea theme for your entire first 2 floors? So what exactly is Boston doing to address this now regular threat, and is it enough? Joining me are Emily Norton. She's director of the Massachusetts Sierra Club and a Newton City Councilor. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. And Richard McGinnis. He's Deputy Director for Climate Change and Environmental Planning at the Boston Planning and Development Agency, formerly known as the BRA. Rich, it's good to see you, too. Thanks for being here. Before we get to solutions, and I do want to talk about solutions, let's see if we can agree on severity and immediacy. How serious and how soon, Emily, starting with you?
How serious and how
flooding,
soon?
this kind of condition that we saw the other day. How regular is it going to be, and how soon is it all upon us?
So I don't think anyone can predict for sure, climate scientists included, exactly what's coming in the future. But we do know that what we just have been seeing, this is 200-year storms in the last 2 months, is what climate scientists have been predicting, except a lot of people predicted this level decades in the future. But I think it's important to keep in mind carbon dioxide levels are higher than they've ever been while there have been human beings on the planet. The last time carbon dioxide levels were at the level that they are now, it was before Homo sapiens, and sea level was 50 feet higher. So we're living in a huge chemistry experiment, basically.
Thank goodness climate change is a hoax. Do you agree with her analysis of at least current events there, Rich?
I do. I think what we saw expected in a way that these are existing floodplains, but caught the city off guard because these areas had never flooded before, or if they had flooded before, it was years ago. The blizzard of '78, there was no one in the South Boston waterfront district.
Let's talk about, speaking of the waterfront district, what currently in this city is most at risk? What worries you most over there? Can I call it the BRA? I know it's not, but I don't remember the new
Boston
name.
Planning and Development
Exactly
Agency.
what it is. What worries you most? What are the most vulnerable parts of the city?
The built environment. I think what we've seen for the projects that are new in the area, they're resilient. They're kind of islands of resilience. It's the existing buildings, the infrastructure that's at risk. We saw that in the flooding in the South Boston waterfront, in East Boston and Charlestown, where roadways were flooded. And you have to ask the question, can emergency vehicles get through these roadways when there's a flood? Can they go rescue people?
What's the answer to that question?
I think it's focusing more on not just the new growth, but more on the infrastructure and the built environment, is how we can retrofit buildings, elevate roadways.
Have we done a decent job of planning in Boston to this point, or have we ignored, for the most part, the threats that were coming, as you said, we thought were decades away?
So I think we have done, well, the city has done a lot of planning. There are a lot of reports, there are a lot of plans. I would hope that on the basis of what we're seeing, that the action parts will step up a little faster.
What does that mean, walk and not enough walk so far?
So there's 2 things. There's the adaptation, but we know...
What does that mean in English?
How we respond, how we keep people safe, particularly our most vulnerable residents. But I think it's really important to keep in mind that the worse, there will be worse impacts if all of us don't take more actions on the mitigation side, that is, getting off of fossil fuels quickly. And on that side, I don't think Boston has done enough, and it's particularly important for Boston to do more because Boston is the biggest city in Massachusetts, the biggest city in New England, and we are a leader community, whether it's Boston or the state of Massachusetts. I don't think we're doing enough on the state side, and I don't think we're doing enough as a city of Boston to be reducing our use of fossil fuels.
Well, yeah, speaking of is Boston doing enough, I'm sure you saw the Washington Post piece, which really caught my attention. A Washington Post piece focused on Boston. Here was the headline that I'm sure drove you crazy. As giant storms hammer Boston, officials are doing little to prepare for them. Did you think that was fair?
No, not fair at all. It disregarded
Why?
all the efforts that are underway in the city of Boston.
Like what? Give me the top 2 or 3 things you think that should assure
Climate-ready
Bostonians
Boston that was published in 2016 sets the risks for flooding in Boston and the risk of climate change, including heat island, extreme precipitation, and other impacts. Since that plan has been published, it has informed all of our central and major planning, including Imagine Boston, Go Boston. So, I mean, we are actively planning, but also building in infrastructure to protect the city
But
from
when
these
you
risks.
say, there was one thing that struck me in particular in that article, Rich, is that when they talked about developers, they suggested that considering climate change in your plans was a voluntary thing. Is that true?
It's voluntary to meet certain LEED criteria.
Why should it be voluntary? Why should a developer not be held to a certain standard if he or she wants to build anything
I
in
think
our city?
We're slowly getting to that point, and we have really good examples of projects, including Atlantic Wharf, which is LEED Platinum, and that was built a few years ago. We have good models to point to remind other developers that you can do this, you can do it right. And
But you don't have to.
At this point.
But why don't, I know you're not the chief, there's Mayor
Jim's
Walsh.
making my points for me.
Thank you. Well, let me just stay with them for one more second. What's the obstacle to getting from voluntary compliance in some cases to mandatory compliance, whether you like it or not? What's the problem? Is the worry that it's going to raise the cost of development or housing or retail? What's standing in the way?
I mean, that's one of the issues is the cost of the construction. It's blanking.
Well, let's leave it there for 1 second. You have this thing, what's in it, Boston Ready? What's the thing you mentioned?
Climate Ready Boston.
Okay, one of the things, part of the research that came out of that, correct me if I'm wrong, is this thing about the possibility of building some sort of seawall. It may not be the proper terminology, but it's close. From Hull to Deer Island, 4 miles, possibly 20 feet high. I haven't heard a word about this except in passing in the last year. Is that the kind of big thinking that needs to be done to protect us in addition to individual responsibility, or no?
It may be, but I think that people should keep in mind that's going to be tens of billions, if not more. And so when we talk about, oh, it's too expensive to ask developers to take these certain steps, it's too expensive to move to buying more clean energy, which was one of the arguments we heard when the mayor's office didn't want to implement something called municipal aggregation.
Which mayor? Boston?
Yeah, this
Okay,
mayor.
yeah.
The city council voted for it, and so now it's going forward. But you know, you hear that, oh, it's too expensive to do this, that, and the other. When we're looking at the costs to respond, I think that we need to be mitigating more.
But
and investing more.
it seems to me, first of all, I assume the federal government is not playing a major role in any of this. They're not funding any of these things.
No, they're making it worse.
They're making it worse. Okay, here's my thesis about these kinds of things, is that even well-intended politicians make a calculation, even if it's not conscious. Is that bridge going to fall down? Is that road going to crack into pieces? Or is the flooding going to overwhelm the seaport while I'm here? And if it doesn't, leave it to the next man or woman. Is that an
So I think it's even worse than that.
What does that mean?
I think, so I met with a state rep who represents part of Boston, I won't say which part, and this person said to me, I never hear about this from my constituents. And as a city councilor in Newton as well, I understand that when people aren't clamoring for things, it makes you less likely to really act on them.
Well, they want things that are immediate threat to them today.
But the
not
thing
a
is,
threat.
whose job is it? Whose job is it to look out for the really, really difficult things that are going to be more expensive and cause so much more suffering if you don't act now? And I think it's it's your local elected leaders in Boston, and the city council really has been terrific, but it's our state legislators, it's our governor, and I would say almost no one is doing enough.
What are the 1 or 2 things, if you were the czar of this for a minute, I'm going to put you on the spot, but if you were the czar, what are the 1 or 2 things within the borders of the city you'd like to see done tomorrow that would make you sleep better and her sleep better?
Well, I think our carbon footprint is pretty small for a city, and
Do you agree with that?
We could be doing more.
we could be doing more.
Okay.
But urban areas, that's where you need to grow. Transit-oriented, less sprawl, and cutting down of forests outside of the urban core. We should be prodding developments more.
Do we need fewer cars on the street? I mean, there was a study out of the Metro.
I think that's happening. I think you see people giving up their cars.
Well, we just saw
certainly
that
younger
Uber
generation.
and Lyft, according to that study from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, are taking people off mass transit to put more cars on the street. So we have to do something about that too?
Right, but is that the bridge where those people that are taking Uber and Lyft don't have vehicles, but they're still relying on single occupancy rides to get around, and you have to condition them out of that?
One last question. Are you hopeful that we're going to get it? I don't just mean Boston. I mean everybody. Individuals, government leaders. Are we all going to get it in time? Or
I don't know.
Well, that's a hopeful sign. Nice to see you. Be well. Good to meet you. Thanks so much, Rich.